right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Rita Marty, and I'm the moderator for this panel discussion. The topic, as you can see it on the screen, it's about securing 5G and building a framework for enabling IoT. It's a great topic. I'm super excited to be here today. I think we're going to go with questions from the beginning. We like to engage the audience from the beginning. I'm going to ask a question or two, but then I'll turn it around for you guys to ask questions. We'll tailor the contents around your questions. We're going to spend maybe a couple of minutes in the beginning introducing the panelists. They're going to tell you a little bit about themselves. I'll start. Rita Marty again. I work for AT&T. I'm an executive director for AT&T. I'm part of the chief security organization, and my team has responsibility for cloud and mobility security, as well as all of emerging services, including IoT. So this topic is really key for what I do at AT&T. So really excited to be here. Look forward to your questions, look forward to the dialogue, and I want to make this interactive as possible. As you can see, the panelists are up on the screen. We're going to give each one of them a minute or two to introduce themselves, and then we'll start with the first questions. And please be ready to ask questions as well after that first question. We're going to start with Angela.
Perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. It's great to be here and to talk about IoT and cybersecurity. My name is Angela McKay. I am Director of Government Security Policy and Strategy at Microsoft. So what does that actually mean? That means I lead our public policy work on cybersecurity, cloud security, and norms of behavior around state actions in cyberspace. I have a team of folks, some here in the US, some in Europe, and then work a lot with our government affairs teams on a global basis to help kind of figure out what are the various roles of industry and government in cybersecurity. As opposed to many of those folks that are in the public policy arena, my background is engineering, so I am one of those crazy nuts who can speak to the geeks and speak to the wonks and spend a lot of my time trying to translate between the two and help them understand each other's expertise and bring it together. When it comes to IoT and cybersecurity, something that I think that's kind of interesting about Microsoft is we play in all of the various segments that we see as having a unique role for security. So there are hardware manufacturers, there are solution developers, solution deployers, and solution operators. And we end up having a seat in each one, and we think collaboration across that space is super important.
Wow. We're done here.
Yeah.
Any questions?
Yeah. I'm Gary Davis with Intel. I'm the Chief Consumer Security Evangelist. I look at what's going on in the security landscape, and I try to distill that down into actionable information we can use in our product strategies, as well as spend a lot of time actually at these type of events. Especially these past 2 years, I've spent a lot of time looking at what's going on with IoT, what are some of the security challenges there, what are some of the things we aren't solving for that we need to be solving for. And then, of course, in this past year, we've taken even a keener look at the introduction of 5G and the impact that's going to have on the whole security ecosystem. So it's a fascinating topic. I'm looking forward to sharing some of my thoughts with my panelists, and that's a little bit about me.
Great. I'm Drew Morin. I'm the Director, Federal Cybersecurity Technology and Programs with T-Mobile US. I try to have as long a title as possible. I'm supporting T-Mobile's Cybersecurity Information Security Office and support of the Government Affairs Office. So I kind of have a foot in both camps where I'm dealing with technologists as well as policymakers. My role there is to help support and structure, if you will, policy and the technology side of things, and to also feed that back into our information security group so that we can actually have a vision of cybersecurity that takes into account, if you will, as a futurist, 3 to 5 years down the road as to where things are going. So this is obviously a topic we're very focused on within T-Mobile with 5G and IoT and where these platforms are going. Leading provider of LTE, probably the highest performance LTE. We just announced a 400 megabit per second type of LTE packet. So we're already used to the idea of highly dense, massive deployed data technologies into our network. So we're experiencing a lot of these technologies as they evolve. And we're very excited about what we can do with 5G, and we expect to continue our leadership in that area.
And I am Jim Hunter. I am the Chief Scientist and Technology Evangelist for Greenwave Systems. Who's Greenwave Systems? We are a software provider that provides the platform for IoT for companies like Verizon or Eon Energy, big companies that touch the mass market. So our interest is specifically IoT as it revolves around the consumer. I've been working in IoT for almost 23 years. That's almost a quarter century. That's really sad. But it's something I actually have a passion for. And it's really interesting when we start to talk about this new landscape that we can create with 5G, because there's a lot of silos. There's a lot of individual activities that are going on. I'm also the co-chair of the Privacy and Security panel with the Internet of Things Consortium. So I'm actually representing two parties in this discussion, and I'm excited to talk about not only how we de-silo and get all of the stakeholders involved in the conversation, but how we do so in a way that is responsible for the consumer and ultimately the consumer data and information that's going to be collected and insights that will be created through IoT.
Okay, excellent. Excellent introduction. Thank you very much. I'm going to start with the first question. I'm typically a panelist. This is my first time moderating, so I'm going to happy to ask you guys the tough questions. First question is about 5G. So 5G is an emerging technology. It's not just about higher bandwidth. It's not just about low latency. It's about the verticals and supporting many verticals with many demands, many use cases, video on demand, IoT with sensors everywhere, but also mission-critical applications. I'd like to hear your perspective on advantages and disadvantages, security advantages and challenges with 5G. We'll start with the end.
Sure. I think that what's interesting about 5G is it's the first time that we're actually seeing the evolution of compute involve communication. Before, with LTE, with 3G, and before, we saw communication kind of strapped on to technology. And now we have the ability to kind of bake it in. And that's really what we need to do. Do we need to create a one-size-fits-all 5G security footprint? And the answer, I think, is actually unequivocally no. We can take advantage of our evolution in compute. The ability to do software-defined networks, the ability to do network slicing, to dedicate certain networks to certain things. For example, HIPAA requirements for a sensor that may be also sending information doesn't make sense. So you will continue to have silos, but what you need to have is this ability to take these standards, these security measures, and exchange them back and forth, because ultimately the value of all of this is in the data and the insights that the data provides. And you're not going to get insights from a single vertical. You're going to get insights from the cross-section. So you have to be able to secure that data in those individual use cases, individual verticals, but at the same time, securely bring that back together to create brand new information that actually moves us forward.
From our perspective, you look at 5G, and it's a great opportunity. It's almost like a blank sheet of paper. The advantages and disadvantages are almost caused by that same challenge. Is you have the opportunity to create from the ground up a whole new technology, a whole new way of delivering, and a whole new architecture. At the same time, you have the disadvantage of all of this newness and being able to understand what the bad actors are going to do. So when we look at what 5G brings for us from a positive perspective, you've got the capability of changing the way that the intelligence in the network is, from it being all in the core to pushing it out to the edge. The network itself becomes a lot more intelligent. It becomes a player in the computing environment. So that's a tremendous capability and a tremendous advantage that 5G is going to bring from us. We're not going to be beholden to legacy exploits, if you will, that came from having to adapt 30-year-old technology into a current environment. We're going to actually be able to take this new spectrum, these new capabilities, and deploy them, and from there, eventually take those into the other bands and make them all part of it. You know, we talk about a multiple radio access technology or a multi-rat type of capability. So it really does give us an advantage of being able to start with a clean slate, design in security measures, countermeasures, design in the analytics, design in the capabilities, and then at the same token, that is the challenge, is that we don't know what the bad guys are going to come up with next. And so we're going to have to make sure it remains flexible and that we ensure that our regulators are partnering with this broad ecosystem so that we don't have prescriptive demands that prevent us from being able to create that innovation and create that agility.
Last year, HP issued research and looked at the top 10 devices deployed in the home. They had on average 25 vulnerabilities each. Simple stuff, you know, encrypted communications, no password resets. I mean, the stuff that any security practitioner would cringe at. You fast forward to 2020 where you have some 50 billion devices, most probably industrial use, I'll give you that, but a healthy number in the home. And you come up with a technology that has almost zero latency and the ability to send data at unprecedented speeds. It presents an interesting security challenge. I think it was last week, a research team, I forgot which company, found I think 1 million IoT devices, most of them consumer cameras, that had a botnet installed and was actually doing active distributed denial of service attacks using those devices. So you have the device manufacturer solving for convenience and time to market. You're going to bring to market this extraordinary technology, which is going to have unprecedented speed and all this other goodness that goes with it. To your point, we can build better security, that we have the foresight to understand how to do it now, but the bad guys know how to usurp it and exploit it. So it's going to be this constant cat and mouse. So it's going to be a wonderful thing, but at the same time, there's going to be a lot of security challenges that are going to really make the industry think twice about how we do it effectively and continue to advance security going forward.
Yeah, I think I'd really agree with my colleagues here and maybe bridge these last 2 points. I think the biggest advantage that we're seeing, or disadvantage or challenge to security, is ultimately going to be the complexity of the ecosystem, right? We already have a complex ecosystem from a cyber risk management point of view. And not only are you going to have this increased number of devices, but you really started to highlight that the place we're in right now is one where most of your information technology right now is built by large-scale technology providers. There are economies of scale for them to do things like secure development and do upgrade and management of the environment. When you move into the kind of heterogeneous 5G-enabled IoT environment, you're going to have a lot of companies who are not traditional IT companies building code and then ultimately needing to be able to help manage the security of the environment. That is super complex. It's not just the devices, it's the number of different vendors that are involved in the delivery of those services. Now, one of the nice upsides is it's also going to help us manage that complexity. If we move forward with things like hardware-based roots of trust and creating the right identity ecosystem to be able to authenticate devices and manage their security, you're going to be able to leverage cloud to be able to help manage that complexity at scale. But so I think it's one of those really interesting, ironic aspects that is, it's the challenge is complexity, but also the advantage is going to be the ability to manage that complexity.
Very, very, very good points. I want to come back to the complexity comments later on because the whole ecosystem is very complex. How do we manage that? But I want to talk a little bit about the cloud and the transformation to a cloud-based architecture. Where, can we leverage SDN and NFV technologies to minimize the complexity and to give us advantage in terms of improving the security posture? Jim?
Yeah, so I think there's more than cloud. There's a lot of little acronyms that are creeping out, like FOG. And I think that's actually absolutely right. It's just like anything else in the world. It works better when it scales from the ground up. And that's what we're talking about. We're talking about these individual devices in the home that revolve around you, and then some sort of a way for them to get up, because they may not be on an LTE, and indeed might not be on an IP network, but be translated into that. You'll have a point at which that translation happens. And as you move up, your levels of security and your translation ability increases as you move up through the fog and up into the cloud. And I think that absolutely we've moved beyond kind of layer 1, layer 2. We're up into software definitions. We're up into application layer routing. We're up into the natural evolution as we move up the stack. And it goes back to that point of saying that this is the first time that the software itself and the hardware are not specifically the only thing in compute. It's now the network more than ever. And compute actually happens in the network. So I think it's extremely important that we leverage the things that we are building in different areas. One of the important things we talked about before this all started, because the cloud, we talk about this ethereal cloud, but it's actually a bunch of machines around the world. And it's the around the world thing that opens up brand new conversations, hopefully we'll get into, because it's not just us changing, it's not just a small group of companies that are changing and moving things, it's the entire globe that needs to shift at the same time because we roam. As an example, I do IoT shows. There's about 365 IoT shows this year. So you're all over the globe for this stuff, so you count on this roaming. And as these implantables and these technologies start to become part of us, they have to be able to have that same security anywhere on the globe.
So we've talked about change in a couple of these answers already. One of the fundamental things I think we're seeing, and as you start looking 3 to 5 years out when this really becomes commercially prevalent, 2020 timeframe, 19 timeframe, we're expecting the 5G networks to really be using them in a more ubiquitous fashion. You're seeing a change of the thought process we have to all have in the cybersecurity industry. Okay? It's always been, let me go ahead and protect the edge device, whether it's antivirus, whether it's something on my phone, whatever, and I'll let the firewalls, what have you. You're protecting this edge, and then inside it's kind of like a GUI center. Okay? That's been the typical cybersecurity approach for years. We've started to do things more within the core of the network to kind of change that. In 5G, we're going to change it radically. Okay? What ends up happening is that we're going to have things, intelligence in the network that's going to be doing such advanced notices, how the network itself can be agile to adjust. We talk about network slicing or software-defined network function virtualization. All of these things enable us to have core components that can be internal to the network that's handling the switching, the routing, processing of the data, whatever, in transit. And the ability to actually have almost like a self-healing network, the ability to identify what's going on inside the network and to basically kill off that slice or kill off that specific instantiation, create another one that's another vertical example of it to take on the work while I take a look at what I just killed and find out what happened to it and do the forensics on it. So the way that we've been thinking about cybersecurity for years, you can use the lessons learned there, but throw away that map and start off with a blank sheet of paper and start redrawing how things are going to operate. And that's what we need to be prepared about. The same is true for regulatory environments around this, because we're talking about all the IoT shows. Imagine if you have some kind of medical alert device or whatever that's feeding back information and it's feeding it through the cloud. The cloud's been pushed all the way out to the edge using mobile edge computing. Now I'm traveling overseas and this device gets attacked or whatever. Well, who's responsible for it? Is it the overseas carrier? Is it my domestic carrier? Is it the IoT provider? Who do I turn to? Who are the authorities that have jurisdiction over this? There's all kinds of other aspects when you start taking the layer up higher and higher and higher that we have to take and create an understanding. So we as an entire ecosystem, whether it's the technology side, whether it's the cloud computing environments, whether it's the regulators, the carriers, we have got to all look at this and throw away the rule book and start off with the knowledge we got, developing it to date, and start off with a new plan and a new vision, and that's how we're going to be prepared as this comes to age. So it's a fun, radical time.
It's an interesting point. You talk about the ability to take down a segment when something bad happens, which you're going to have to do, but then when you're running things that latency is not an option, driverless cars or remote surgery or stuff like that, those are the things that how do you solve for? How do you take a segment down and then have some sort of redundancy built in so there's zero delay in that new segment coming online, which doesn't have the inherent security issue. I mean, it presents an extraordinary challenge that it's going to take a lot of really brilliant people to think through, to think, how do we actually make this happen? Mm-hmm. It's the applicability of this and these new use cases that are just now coming in front of us. 10 years ago, who would have thought that you could start your car and do everything with your phone, right? Now you're doing that. And, you don't even have to use your phone to do anything. The car's just going to drive itself. So it's how you could use software-defined networks and other capabilities and do it in such a way that the switching and the rerouting and the insight that bad guys are going to do something to affect that portion of the network at some point, and it's understanding that when that takes place and how to make sure that the redundancy and the ability to bring it back on instantaneously is going to be paramount.
I think that, so funny enough, I've been involved in the cybersecurity world for almost 15 years from the time when it used to be like trying to get people to care. Like, hey, there are computers, there's risk, we should worry about that. But two of the things that we always talk about when we talk about cybersecurity is how to create sufficient agility to be responsive to the dynamic nature of the risk environment, and how to be able to take risk-based approaches to the application of resources, such that when you don't have a network perimeter, you can actually look and say, this service requires this level of security and this service requires something different, and it can change. So when I think about some of the benefits of this world, it's going to be, we're going to better be more agile in the environment and be able to do risk-based deployment and application of resources to different services based on attributes and based on the machine learning that you can get out of the cloud environment to help inform that. I think those are two of those really clear differentiators.
Excellent.
Can I
A
have
lot
one
of good
thing? Can I have
comments.
one
Go ahead.
thought?
But we're not done.
Yeah, we're not done. We're going to commit here a little bit, so just relax, okay? So, I mean, you know, we talk about the machine learning aspects, and it's interesting because we do risk-based assessments, et cetera, et cetera. The idea of trying to do this, like you're saying, in machine time, in real time, is going to require a whole new service level agreement concept, a security service level agreement. And these are the types of activities. There are new frames of thought we have to, as an industry, grapple with. And as cybersecurity professionals, you have to start rethinking the way that you execute. The idea that a machine can, is going to have to be, I don't want to say machine, because it's not. It is a network of machines. It's are going to have to be empowered to be able to adjust, execute whatever agile corrective action it needs to do without human intervention. Because I don't know, when you're communicating with 1 millisecond latency time, the couple seconds it takes for a person to push that button, a lot can happen. A lot can happen.
What we're skirting around is actually artificial intelligence. And it's interesting because it actually goes back to the point that this is actually compute. I don't think it's, you say it's not a machine, it's absolutely a machine.
Yeah,
I just think it's a
analytic.
soft machine. We're dealing with bits instead of atoms at this point, but it's the same mechanisms that are going on. And I think that that's something that has to creep in the conversation. When you talk about throwing away and restarting, you have to think about alternatives. So for example, when you talk about needing that immediate response time, you have to think about distributed intelligence as it applies to moving those network stacks around just like anything else. So I think that it's a much bigger picture that brings a lot more things to the plate that we haven't seen before.
And I guess I'd just add one thing, and maybe it's something that Rita can ask us a question about. I think a lot of what you've heard from us is the opportunity that exists with security in IoT and 5G. But one of the things I talked about with my panelists beforehand would be, what are the inhibitors that are challenging us actually realizing those opportunities, and how do we need to work to address those? Because I think the opportunity space is great, but if you ask me as a cybersecurity professional, when I look at the trend is we're not necessarily fully realizing the security opportunities that are on the horizon, and we need to explore how to do so.
Great comments about the security opportunities. I totally resonate with that, with this comment, because I think security as a service is going to be something we can enable if we leverage SDN and NFV. So we have different security controls, different security zones, and we can do it in real time, on demand. So really great comments. I want to turn it to the audience and see what's on your mind. What questions do you have? So we'd like to take a question or two. I think there is a mic. Okay, excellent. So if anybody wants to ask a question.
We know it's right after lunch, but come on, folks.
And by the way, when you ask a question, just hold the mic as close as your mouth as possible, so everybody can hear you.
While more security is desirable, consumers often don't want to be inhibited by it.
Yeah.
How are you seeing this reflected in consumer expectations related to security, and how do you expect this demand to change in a 5G environment? Thank you.
I'll start. Consumers are very, what's the word, apathetic towards security, right? They all know they need it. It's funny, every year we do all these surveys and talk to consumers. We have 200 million subscribers, and we ask them questions, right? Every consumer understands that they need it, right? But how do you deliver it in such a way that's not going to slow their systems down, slow their experiences down, allow them to do the things they want to go do without the encumbrance of knowing that it's in the most secure state possible? Angela, sorry.
okay.
bad with names. But she started to go down a thread, which I think is extremely interesting from a consumer perspective, dealing with authentication and identity. Right, today there's a breach of the day, and it talks about hundreds of millions of passwords, username passwords being exposed, and then of course you get all these emails from all the companies, go change your stuff. But I believe we're at the cusp of going to an environment, because of IoT and all these other technologies, that the devices are going to be smart enough to know who you are, and by your proximity to that device, it knows what services you're allowed to do, what type of capabilities you have, and you don't have to do anything. And you're passing tokens back and forth instead of username and password. So I think consumers will adapt this if it's easier than what they do today, right? They say, well, geez, if you can demonstrate the security is better than they have today, and the convenience is orders of magnitude better, they'll embrace this in leaps and bounds. And we're just now to the point, find a device today that doesn't have a microphone, a camera, a fingerprint scanner, proximity, Bluetooth, and all these other things that when combined together, provide an authentication service which is unrivaled. So I think that to your point explicitly, I think consumers, there's unfortunately a lot of consumers are going to be the early adopters of this stuff, and we're going to have to learn from some of the ways they use these technologies. But ultimately, they realize the importance of it. They're going to embrace it, and they're going to continue to take this stuff on en masse. And they're going to look to us as industry to make sure we're providing the safest, most secure environment that takes into account their privacy when we build and deploy these networks and technologies.
I'll add to that, Gary. I think that I actually would add to the fact you say they're apathetic to security as it exists today. And I think it's a value versus cost relationship. And moving forward, when they realize that security is the underpinnings of privacy, then it changes. And I think that the privacy, you don't care about security, you don't care about privacy until you do. And then if you ever have your identity stolen or have anything like that that totally mars your life, you think differently about that moving forward. I was on a panel at CES with a couple of old folks like me and a millennial, and the millennial said privacy is dead, we don't care about privacy anymore. I went home and I was kind of sad about that, and I talked to my son who's a Generation Z, and he said, no way, we learned from the previous generation it's not dead. Because I actually told that guy, I said, hey, have you ever gotten a digital tattoo? If you get a tattoo and you go overseas, you forget about the impact that's going to have as you get older and older and older, and that's still there, you're going to have that. Digital tattoos are going to be a thing. We're going to be collecting information about ourselves in ways and insights that identify us in ways that we may not want to have done. And if we don't have control of the privacy of that, that's going to impact how technology is adopted and what that value-cost relationship is.
Agreed.
Go ahead.
No, ladies first.
So a couple of things that come to mind. So one, I do think there is a small level of increasing demand from the consumer side for security. I like to say there are very few upsides to all of the terrible, terrible media reporting about all of the different cyber threats that are going on in the world. But one of those few upsides is whether you're talking to consumers or whether you're talking to enterprises or you're talking to governments, we're not where I was at 15 years ago trying to say care. So people, I think at this point, care. But to the point that's made over here, this idea of what is expected of a consumer, so what behaviors should they actually be taking? I tend to talk to my dad, who's over 70, and then one of my cousins.
Why'd you point at me?
No, he's over here. This is the left and
General
right.
direction, actually.
The left and my dad,
Obviously,
who's
this is
over
the older
70.
side of the panel.
And then my cousins who are like 15 and 16 because they're like good, and then my sister because they're like good data points on what consumers really think, right? They're not in the IT industry. And what I find consistently in talking with them is they're like overwhelmed by the nature of the threat and intimidated about, well, what are they really supposed to do and what is their vendor supposed to do for them or what is their network service provider supposed to do for them. So I think while the interest level is up, the cost basis is not there. It's going to have to actually ultimately apply to what makes people be able to be more productive, how security is an enabler for that, and then a great discussion around what is the actual expectation of a consumer and what do we as technologists need to be baking into products and services to enable them to make better choices.
That's a great point. I think that the reality is with consumers, security and privacy are a paradox, and I mean that in a very strange way, is that 10, 15 years ago, I was at a privacy conference, and people were talking about how you need to protect your privacy, this, that, and the other, which I agree with. And then I said, and I got up to speak, and I said, okay, how many people have a phone on their hip, a mobile phone? And this was like 15 years ago, and of course, everybody raised their hand. I said, so that phone's probably on, even when you're at home at dinner. So you're allowing people to invade your privacy because you are willing to give that up for convenience. So the paradox is this. Consumers are willing to sacrifice privacy, sacrifice security if they get something in return. And it's more really, that's a privacy paradox more than a security. What we have to do in terms of security and cybersecurity in these networks is provide a capability, provide that security, and do it in such a way that the consumer can receive the benefit without having to do much action. Okay? Because quite frankly, raise your hand again, how many people checked out the security ratings of their handset before they bought their new one? Okay, yeah, there you go. The people on the panel probably the only ones. And are you worried about what the chip was, whether it had a root of trust capability or had the ARM trust environment turned on or whatever. So the thing is that most consumers don't realize how much we as industry already do to basically enable consumer security and consumer privacy, and they shouldn't have to. We do it because actually the market's going to tell you it's the right thing to do. Okay? We also do it because it protects our networks just as much as it protects our customers. And our focus is on ensuring that our consumers have security protections so that we're not the next Target or whatever, or Sony, whatever you want to call OPM, whichever one you want to call out as an example. These things are going to happen. So as long as we provide capabilities within our network, intelligence with our network, and with 5G, it's going to be much better enhanced. And we're hoping that we'll have a much more savvy consumer audience that understands when they're opting in and opting out of various and sundry services, capabilities, blacklist, whitelist, what have you. They understand what it means, and they also understand that it's not static, and they should probably review these things as they go through their new devices, their new apps, or what have you. So, but it's definitely a consideration we all take into account in our ecosystem.
Okay, we have another question right here in the back.
This is questions for the panel, but I'd like to start off with Angela. And I asked this question earlier in another panel, so I'm going to ask you too, because you had mentioned machine to machine in the form. So if I can put that into artificial intelligence, the DARPA was at DEF CON, and they launched their first ever machine to machine hacking in that. And I know you know what I'm talking about. I'd like, if you don't mind starting that out, your thoughts and opinions of that, and if the panel could jump on that and what you think and how that applies to your statement earlier about artificial intelligence and machine to machine as it applies to cyber.
Yes, so just very briefly for those who might not be aware, in August there is a very large hacker conference held in Las Vegas called Black Hat, and DARPA did have a contest there where they basically had machines hacking other machines. I believe, I might be wrong, but I believe it was Carnegie Mellon who actually ended up having the team that was successful. And there was a lot of controversy about whether or not that was a good thing to do. Because they were saying, hey, while this is interesting, you're also now demonstrating a series of scenarios that bad actors may not have thought about. And so I tend to think that it was a really interesting exercise and a useful exercise because those scenarios already exist. In other words, machines are already using artificial intelligence to carry out certain particular threat activities. For example, even just the distribution of spam is basically AI or an algorithm saying to take certain actions. So I think it was, first of all, I think it was very interesting. Second of all, I think it was pretty useful. I think one of the things that we have to think about is what is that kind of environment where there is sufficient transparency into what's being done with artificial intelligence such that people who are subject to that artificial intelligence can have the level of understanding about what actions it's going to take relative to the environment. I think that is an emergent policy conversation and certainly one that is going on in some geographies, I would say more than others. I'm definitely seeing a lot more of that coming out of, for example, Japan that is thinking about IoT and smart cities and what is the government's role of engaging in defining or having transparency around the algorithms. But other people might have comments on this one as well.
Super cool. I mean, it is super cool. This is really
Super
interesting.
cool.
For the geeky. It's
Yeah, for the geek.
cool.
But it's like introduces the notion of, to your point earlier, how we need to think differently in the future, right? I mean, when you think of what's going on from a state-sponsored attack perspective, right? And how do you build an effective defense against that doesn't require a lot of individuals pounding away on keyboards to respond, right? So the more intelligent the machines can become to build cyber defenses against, attacks from state-sponsored or other types of attacks, I think is a future state that we need to be mindful of and think about. I mean, it's kind of scary because you think about, what's that movie, The Terminator?
Yeah.
That kind of stuff. But, that aside, it's not that far-fetched to think that there's not enough machine learning, artificial intelligence, and other capabilities that are just in our ecosystems today to build these types of capabilities. I just think you're going to see more and more of that instead of less, for sure.
Yeah, my comment is that that was a demonstration of an evolution of what's already happening. Okay, you think about these wonderful graphics processor units we have in these new PCs, laptops, and incredible color generation, all the stuff they're able to do, and the massively parallel processing capability they have. Well, that's wonderful for password cracking. Okay, that is basically another example of an intelligent device basically being used to attack another. Or another network or what have you. So this is an evolution. It's nothing necessarily new, but it is an evolution of what we're seeing in the attack side of the game. And the belief is that we have to continue to evolve our defensive strategy to where we can do it at machine speed, or we're going to continue to see what we see today, which is the offense really does have the advantage right now. Partly because the defense is kind of hamstrung a little bit, but the offense does have the advantage. All they have to do is find a little hole, one failure on the defensive strategy, and the offense gets in. So it was a great demonstration, interesting how they're taking learning and applying it. It's the same thing we're doing analytics for defensive capabilities. So it's a natural, to your words before, cat and mouse type of game.
So to your point, Gary, on Terminator, I'm quite glad that they call this 5G and not Skynet. Moving in the right direction. Every year, they look at the traffic that flows over the internet and where the source of the traffic is. This last year, 2015, was when they did the last measurement. 51% of the traffic over the internet was from humans. Yay, we own the internet. 29% was actually from bad bots. The rest was from good bots. And that's a problem because you're going to see that number change. We're going to lose the internet traffic. It's going to be a natural thing. Machine to machine is inevitable. It is, again, the evolution of compute. And now that we're baking in communication into every single product, it's definitely going to be more. When we talk about some of these failures, there's websites that are out there that actually will expose to humans, translates the failures into something humans can see. There's a website called Shodan, S-H-O-D-A-N. All it does, 24/7, 7 days a week, no vacation time, hacks. It looks for weaknesses based on known profiles. And that's all it does, and then it exposes those weaknesses. That's how the nanny cams in London were exposed through TrendNet. People started talking to their babies, people who were not the parents of the children started speaking to the babies in their nurseries through these cameras because of this failure that was exposed by a machine so that others could exploit it. It's important, the work that Black Hat is doing, in my opinion.
Always.
And the DEF CON challenges, when they expose, for example, they look at door locks. And they went after door locks, and it turns out that of 20 so door locks, only 4 kind of withstood the hacking challenge. I think it's important to help to strengthen and to reinforce products by finding the weaknesses and using the industry to do it. And as far as hacking machine, it's been happening and it will continue to happen. The stuff that we're doing here is really about making sure that it's not about the hacking the machines as much as the information that's actually flowing for the 51% of us today that are generating the information for the internet. And the bad bots are continue. Bad bots are a corporate thing now, right? The cybercrime is a corporate level thing. Companies are set up around the world that get funding and get buildings, and they're going after the things that we have and the things that we're trying to protect. So it's a cat and mouse offensive defensive strategy for sure.
Excellent. I think we have time for another question or two. Do we have any from the audience? Okay. I'd like to go back to the complex ecosystem that we're dealing with. One dimension of that is the when you look at IoT, it's regulated by many committees. And we have to cover many use cases with varying requirements. So what do you see are the challenges, and how can we work together with the IoT committees to enable security end-to-end?
Just like anything, it's about partnership.
And cooperation.
Right? Cooperation, absolutely. That's what IoT is actually really all about, is bringing together everybody in this industry, all the stakeholders, everybody who has value in this equation needs to come together and be in agreement. It's not necessarily saying that at every single level it has to be consortium. It has to be collections of companies that are involved. You're definitely going to still have your vertical solutions, but you need to let them know that not having security is not an option, because it's the point of ingest of the data, the point of creation of new data through insight. When it's in motion and when it's in storage, short-term and long-term, security has to be there to maintain, again, from my perspective, the privacy is generally the most important thing. It's the thing that we've actually, as a world, come together on, is the privacy through something like HIPAA, saying your health and what's going on inside your body and tying that to you, that is important to protect. That's exactly what we're measuring with IoT. What's going on in your body and what could be going on in your body. So we need to stay vigilant in our protection there.
The existing standards bodies, ITU, 3GPP, ATIS, the list goes on and on, obviously, in the telecom space. Then you add to it the broader space, CloudForm, et cetera, you end up realizing there's lots of standards bodies who are looking at this 5G. And each one of them have got a role to play in establishing the guidance from a consortium perspective, or from a sharing perspective, okay? What's interesting is that it's not just industry bodies that need to be doing this. And that's one of the things, that there is a role beyond the industry standards organizations. There's a role with the consumer organizations. There's a role with the federal and the global government organizations to participate. There's also the key thing when we talk about this 5G framework or this 5G ecosystem, it's the ability to have cloud service providers, device chipset providers, application providers, service providers, and others get together and actually look at this problem end to end. And that's, once again, where you talk about the changing thought. You think about in a lot of the technology companies, you have these new agile teams, which tend to be vertically integrated, as opposed to, we're going to get all the communications engineers together over here, we're going to get all the financial people over here. And instead, you're creating these vertical teams to be very agile. The same thing, when we talk about a framework for the future, is we have to look at those type of agile approaches and apply it to standards, to development, to other types of activities that we're doing. So once again, I think we have to change the way that we think and the way that we've operated. The way we've got in the past got us to where we are today, which is a good place. But for us to accelerate, we need to actually work differently.
Yeah. You're right, Drew. It's going to take a dramatically different way of thinking about the problem, right? We can't think about the way we've historically addressed it, whether or not that's through consortiums or other cooperatives, who knows. I think one of the big struggles we're going to have is the globalization of this, right? What's relevant and meaningful here from a consortium and an organizational perspective may not be the same in Europe or Asia and places like that. So if you can figure it out here, how do we make it, what's the best things that are going on around the world, and how do we come up with something that when you, to your point, I'm all over the world as well, when I go to Japan this weekend, how do I know all my devices I'm going to take with me are going to work there the way I expect them to, and it's fluid, it's seamless. It presents a massive challenge and opportunity for us as well.
Yeah, so I think I'll ping out on the word partnership, because when I hear that, I tend to think people think about it in one of two ways. They tend to think about it as industry partnerships and consortium or standards groups, or public-private partnerships where industry and government are working together. And I guess I would say, I think the importance here is highlighting that you're going to have a range of partnerships, and you need to have a range of partnerships to make this work. You're going to need to have technical partnerships among industry and governments to build standards. You're going to need to have operational partnerships that work on mitigating some of the risks that occur in this environment, and you're going to need to have partnership to figure out the policy environment. So it's not just industry to industry or industry to government. It's industry to industry, industry to government, government to government, industry to academia, and academia to civil society. Actually, I want to make sure that that gets brought up in the conversation on partnerships, because when we think about some of the unique risk, like the risk environment of IoT is not necessarily fundamentally different, but certain scenarios are of more concern. And the collection and use of personal data in IoT is one of those risk scenarios that is unique, and we need to make sure that we have civil society engaged in that conversation on partnerships. So, before I break though, if we're all like, how are we gonna get everybody together in a room and we're all gonna hold hands and sing Kumbaya and then privacy and security are gonna be solved? No, that's not how it's gonna work. When I think about having these partnerships be effective, it's going to be a couple of different other attributes. It's going to be having partnerships that have that right composition, but who are focused on specific challenges and then can solve those and iterate on new ones. And those challenges and who should be in there is going to be based on your role and capability. Again, one of the things that we've really been highlighting is you're going to have to decompose the vendor community that exists in IoT between those who make the devices, those who are developing solutions, deploying solutions, and think about the roles that they have relative to security and privacy and be a little bit more specific, because it isn't going to be everybody sitting in one room being able to solve all of the different challenges.
Excellent comments about partnerships and also the need to embed security controls day one in the design for 5G. I want to thank the panelists for a great discussion. I also want to thank the audience for great questions, and it's been a pleasure hosting us. Thank you.